Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
As I said, this is that moment where organizing is so important. If you remember last week, we talked with Randy Corrigan from the Teamsters Union. He's their organizer for Amazon. And as I said, last week, I said the same thing. This is the moment where there's a great opportunity to organize because they keep complaining there's a labor shortage. They're desperate for working people. There's an opportunity here to take advantage of the moment. And here to share some thoughts on the possibilities of that and also what we talked about with Randy Corrigan last week, organizing Amazon. I've asked Stephen Greenhouse to come talk with us. Stephen's a former New York Times labor reporter, one of the last in the country. He's also the author of numerous books on the state of labor. In fact, the most recent that I know of, Beaten Down, Worked Up, the Past, Present, and the Future of American Labor. Stephen, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be back here, Rick.
So, last week we had Randy on the program. Their goal is to organize Amazon after what we saw down in Alabama. Any hope you think there?
I think there's hope. I mean, I did two stories over the past week based on interviews with Randy Corrigan. And, the Teamsters are a big, mighty union with a swaggering reputation. And despite the corruption of the past and despite the film Hoffa, a lot of workers, who are eager for raises or eager for better benefits, they see the Teamsters and say, that is a fighting union. That's a union that delivers to its workers. Not all the times because companies are very, very tough in fighting back. But I think the Teamsters really register a lot of workers. They have more experience unionizing warehouse workers than any other union. But, and as you were saying before, Rick, this is a really ripe time for workers. A lot of workers are immensely pissed off in how they were treated during the pandemic. In my book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, I talk about how so many workers have felt beaten down in recent years, and they feel very worked up. They want to do something. So I think coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people are jazzed about unionizing. And with the election of Joe Biden, who is really the most pro-union president probably since Roosevelt, I think it's a really good opportunity for workers. But, as you've often talked about in your show, corporations are not going to roll over. Corporations are going to continue fighting as hard as they can to stop workers from unionizing. So the big question is whether the mighty Teamsters can somehow figure out a way to overcome mighty Amazon's very powerful anti-union efforts.
Yeah, full disclosure, I've been a Teamster for 33 years. And as I say all the time, I wish everyone had the same kind of wages, hours, and conditions that I was able to support my family on and get through, because the National Master Freight Agreement, which I worked under all of my career, has built family-sustaining wages and jobs out of what were basically sweatshop conditions when my grandparents walked the world. So there is a way forward.
In my book, Rick, I explained that once upon a time, jobs in auto plants were horrible jobs. People worked insane hours. It was incredibly dangerous. But thanks to the United Auto Workers and their power and their strikes, they turned those lousy, dangerous jobs into good jobs that pay very good wages with very good benefits. That doesn't mean the jobs might not still be monotonous, but for the hard work you do, you get very good benefits, good wages with safety. And when I interviewed Randy Corrigan last week, he pointed out something that I tweeted about and went totally viral. He said, the typical Amazon driver in Southern California makes $16 an hour. And Randy told me that back in 1996, 25 years ago, unionized UPS drivers in Southern California are making $20.50 an hour. That's already $4.50 more than Amazon drivers, and that was 25 years ago. And now, Randy told me, unionized UPS drivers in Southern California make $38 an hour compared to the $16 that Amazon workers make, plus unionized drivers make another $20 an hour in benefits. So if you're looking for an argument to persuade Amazon folks why you should unionize, it's hard to find a better argument than that.
No, and what it is, and this is what Randy and I spoke about as well, is that, this has to happen because Amazon is pulling everybody down. Every warehouse job, every delivery job, all of these, in the freight jobs in the industry that I'm working in, it pulls everything down because it creates these low-wage jobs that desperate people need. and they exploit the desperate and ended up pulling everybody else down. So if the Teamsters can't organize the package drivers and the delivery drivers, it's going to be bad news for the rest of the industry and for transportation as a whole.
Absolutely. And if anyone can do it, the Teamsters can do it. I think the Teamsters would be smart to ally themselves or team up with other unions and with community groups, African American groups, immigrant groups, environmental groups, whatever. I think people see, millions of people see how workers are being squeezed and screwed in many ways, and they want to help unions. And the approval rate of unions is the highest it's been in like 50 years. And the Teamsters would be smart, just as the teachers are very smart in their strikes in West Virginia and Arizona and Chicago and LA to go forward with strong community support, because it's much easier for unions to win that way. Workers are much more willing to stick their necks out and support a union and go on strike if they know that their neighbors, that their community is behind them.
And this is where we had talked about it. When I talk about all the time, we've got to rebuild this culture of unionism to where you may never be a union member, but you want to support people to have that voice on the job, to bargain for those better wages, hours, and conditions, because you understand it's going to benefit you as well. That when you're that rising tide lifting all boats thing, that analogy actually working in this way, instead of when the rising tide comes up, the billionaire's boat crushes your dinghy into the dock. That which was what we've been living under. But to me, it's that what Randy talked about is that wraparound, how we pull in community groups, as you've said, how we pull in the community, your neighbors, and make this kind of like my grandparents' generation were able to do. I mean, I think back to the stories my grandfather told me of the organizing and look, holding people accountable. I tell the story all the time of when I moved in with my grandparents, he said, "Don't you ever go over to that guy's house and play with his grandkids. I don't want to ever see you over there, or I'll whip your behind." And a couple of years later, I go, "What was that about?" Turns out that guy crossed a picket line 50 years beforehand, and he never forgave him. It's that kind of culture and that kind of accountability I think we have to return to.
I agree. So, I wrote this book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, and one of the main reasons my publisher, who's a good progressive, my editor is a good progressive guy, said, you should write a book, Steve. And I covered labor for the New York Times, 18 years. You should write a book, Steve, that explains, the benefits of worker power, the benefits of unions. And in my book, I really try to walk readers through how, conditions are terrible for garment workers, early in the 20th century in the U.S. Conditions are horrible for auto workers. Conditions are really tough for truck drivers. And I explained how the formation of unions really lifted hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of workers by workers banding together, by sticking their necks out, by forming unions, by pressuring companies. American companies were usually prosperous after World War II, and they weren't very eager to share their huge profits, sounds like today. And it was really the strength of unions, through strikes like the Flint sit-down strike, and the strength of the great union based in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, the United Steelworkers, that pressured humongously powerful and profitable companies like General Motors and Ford Motor Company, United States Steel and Bethlehem Steel, to share much more of their profits with workers. And that really played a pivotal role, as I explain in my book, in building the middle class. Then later in the 1970s and 80s, when workers were finally doing well in the United States, there was this huge counteroffensive led by corporations. They started hiring, gazillions of, anti-union consultants and anti-union lawyers, and that was really helped, as I explain in my book, by Ronald Reagan's crushing of the strike by the air traffic controllers. And now, there's been a much more sophisticated fight by corporations against unions in the U.S., and unions now have gotten better at fighting back. So we're in this tug of war, but as we discussed, Rick, workers are really feeling frustrated. They see the stock market at record levels. They see huge tax cuts for the rich, and they're saying, what about us? We want our share. And I think that's one of the reasons Biden won, is that, he's Scranton Joe. He's a pro-union guy. He visits firefighters, and he really talks. He walks the walk and talks the talk to help union workers. And I think people, workers unions see a real opportunity. It would, of course, again, as you talked about on your show, it would really help to enact the PRO Act. But it would take, as many of your listeners know, it will take probably 60 votes in the Senate to get that enacted unless we get rid of the filibuster. And that might be hard to do. So I think the Biden administration is doing, all it can, even without the PRO Act, to make it easier to unionize.
Right. But here's the thing, and this is where I go back to. I don't necessarily even care about the PRO Act, because you talked about the Flint sit-down strike. Some of the things that my grandparents' generation did, those weren't legal. We didn't ask. It wasn't Mother May I. As a society, we demanded, and this is where I keep coming back to this sense of empowerment that the working class of this country has forgotten. I had a conversation with a worker today who, when I was explaining the difference between at-will employment and just cause employment, the person asked me, won't the boss be upset? And I'm going, I don't care about that. We have a contract. We enforce a contract. You should be happy that we have that and not caring about that. But we've become this society that we now care what the boss thinks, and we're willing to be cheated out of wages. We're willing to be put in desperate conditions and dangerous conditions. I say we need to return to some bit of militancy, to where we're standing up for ourselves and saying, we're not taking it anymore.
I mean, Rick, I totally agree. Increased militancy will help. But, during the Flint sit-down strike, unions and workers had, there was much more community solidarity, because so many people during the Depression were poor, were beaten down. And so the Flint sit-down strikers, when they sat in at some key General Motors plants in 1936, 37, and won and got the biggest company in the world to agree to recognize the union, that was a humongous victory. And it was very important that they had big community support, and government leaders even supported them in many ways.
Right.
Now, and don't think that the Flint sit-down strikers weren't scared, but they knew they had a lot of community support. They had a lot of sort of solidarity. They were confident that the Michigan governor would back them. Now, yes, more militancy would help, but I think people are more scared that there's not as much, community solidarity behind unions. Yes, the teachers are very smart when they went on strike in West Virginia and Oklahoma and Arizona. They first made sure that they had a lot of community support. So, yes, there should be more worker militancy, more union militancy, but I think before you rush out to do that, you've really got to make sure you have strong community support and hopefully strong backing from government leaders, or else, the man might really crack down on you and you get arrested or get fired. So, people forget, sorry, one more thing. West Virginia teacher strike was totally illegal. And the teachers basically said, I dare you, Republican Governor Justice, who happened to be the richest human being in the state of West Virginia, I dare you to arrest us or crack down on us, because they knew that if they were arrested, the SH would really hit the fan. Yep. and that people would humongously support them. So if you have your ducks in a row, if you have strong solidarity and strong community support, you could really be more militant.
I see that as you pointed out, General Motors at the time was the largest employer in the world. Now you've got Amazon, who is the behemoth at this time, and I think if you have a concerted campaign, I think a lot of people are afraid of their growth. I think when you tell people that they spent $200 million fighting back an organizing campaign, that makes them think twice. I think there's a moment here. At least I hope there's a moment here where we're seeing organizing, especially in places like New York or Washington, states that still have strong union density to this day. I'm still hoping that that's possible.
I hope you're right. So, I did a story about an effort to unionize the Amazon warehouse, the used Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, the borough of New York. I live in Manhattan. But I think a lot, like when Flint, Michigan workers went on strike, everyone in Flint knew about the GM plant. Everyone in Flint had friends or sons or parents who worked at the plant. I think in theory, a lot of people are pissed off at Amazon and how Amazon treats its workers. But on the other hand, Rick, a lot of people love Amazon because it sends them lots of stuff really cheap. So I think, again, if you're going to do a mass action on Amazon, and again, the Teamsters get this. When you talk to Randy Corrigan, I'm sure he told you the same thing, that they're going to really try to build strong community support, because that will, put pressure on Amazon. If the Teamsters could really get a lot of people to say, I'm going to boycott Amazon, for a month or 2 months, unless you agree to neutrality, unless you agree not to fight a union, that could make a real difference. But it takes organizing, solidarity.
No, you're right. And it takes messaging. I mean, at the end of this, there are so few programs like this one that talks about this from a perspective of workers. We've done not a great job of having microphones to lift up the voices of working people and the concerns of average everyday working people. So as I tell my friends at the Teamsters and other places, you've got to get out there and tell those stories. The Amazon organizing campaign, I think, did pull back the cover on a lot of things. The fact that Amazon at that place had 100% turnover, the fact that you had drivers having to go to the bathroom in bags because they couldn't get breaks, the fact that you had in the bathrooms anti-union stuff plastered everywhere. When we hear those stories, I think people get angry, and we need more information, not less.
No, I agree. So on one hand, yes, the retail wholesale department store union lost badly when it sought to unionize the Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama. But on the other hand, in ways, that was just kind of a first step that it was in some ways a victory because it achieved some very important things. It got the whole nation, the whole world to focus far more on how stressful and arduous and in ways bad and unsafe Amazon jobs are. And as you pointed out, Rick, people realize, hey, turnover at Amazon is huge because workers just feel so beaten down, so beaten up by their jobs, they're leaving. And another big step forward in that Amazon fight in Alabama was it really shined a light on how humongously anti-union Amazon is and how unfair the playing field is, that when workers seek to organize, that employers have huge advantages compared with the unions. So I explained in my book, when workers seek to organize a private company, the employer has access 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to the workers. It could show videos in the lunchroom, videos in the break room, put videos on computer screens, whatever. And under American law, companies have the right to prohibit union organizers from even setting foot into the company parking lot. They can get arrested. And companies have these captive audience meetings, these required meetings for workers to listen to propaganda, and many companies even take down a pro-union flyer that's on the bulletin board inside the plant. So one of the good things about the PRO Act is it will help level the playing field so that it's not so easy for companies to defeat unionization efforts.
Now we got a lot of work to do. The book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor, written by Stephen Greenhouse, former New York Times labor reporter. Stephen, I hope folks take a look at the book. We'll get links out on social media. But great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Great you're going to be on WBAI in New York. Congrats.
Yes, looking forward to it. Thanks so much. Our good friend Stephen Greenhouse. Again, the book, Beaten Down. Make sure you take a look at it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.